environmental performance. There's a book by David Vogel, a co-author of mine, who has written this book, The Market for Virtue, and what he says in there is that, unfortunately, looking at these studies, he finds little support for the claim that more responsible firms are more profitable. I think that's painting it a little too bleakly. He then goes on to say, but that does not mean that there is no business case for virtue. It is rather to suggest that any such claim must be more nuanced. CSR does make business sense for some firms in specific circumstances. And my work, at least in ethical consumerism, reflects this. What you find is that there are certain circumstances where for certain companies, by paying attention to issues of CSR that resonate with consumers, it'll work. There will be an economic return. But the business case for CSR is highly contingent in that instance and in others, and indeed highly idiosyncratic. There is not a one-size-fits-all business case for CSR. And there's also considerable skepticism about what companies are doing. So there may well be company attention to CSR, there may well be company programs on CSR, but a fair degree of skepticism, a fair degree of doubt exists, at least in civil society. It's never been more prominent on the corporate agenda, but civil society and the broader public are skeptical, if not in some instances deeply critical. There's a study rather aptly named Behind the Mask by Christian Aid, put out in 2004. And what it said there was that the corporate world's commitments to responsible behavior are not borne out by the experience of many who are supposed to benefit from them. And included in that report, in that study, were observations by Christian Aid in the Niger Delta, and indeed Shell was one of the companies that was criticized in that report. So the skepticism about whether all this attention to CSR actually really makes any difference to the folk it's supposed to help. What does this mean then when we get to the context of Africa? And here again, let me stress that I am not an Africa expert by any means. You are the Africa experts, and over the next 3 days, we will be working with your expertise to think about what CSR really does mean for Africa. But here are some thoughts that I have. So if you look at what I've been saying about CSR, what I've been saying about CSR is how it has business benefits in certainly a developed economy context. Well, are those drivers for CSR, when we think about those drivers for the business case, are they relevant in the Africa context? So, for example, do consumers care? Do consumers really care about the sort of issues, at least to the same extent as they do in developed world markets, where in those often highly competitive consumer markets, CSR provides a much-needed point of differentiation for companies? How relevant is that to the Africa context? In fact, if you go back to that slide where I was sharing with you some of these business benefits of CSR, you might reflect on, well, can we really see these business benefits here in our businesses in Africa? And we might, beyond that, say, well, how is CSR understood in this context? Is it seen as something that is strategic, that is integrated, that's addressing the social and environmental impacts of the business in its day-to-day activities? Or is it seen as something that's more akin to philanthropy? And what about the role of local traditions? What about the sense of community that's very strong in the African cultures, the idea of extended kinship? And I'm quoting here Ken Amishi, who's on our program in the next couple of days. What do the local traditions say about the right approach to CSR in the African context? Let me close with some thoughts on some of the challenges. And firstly, some of the key challenges for CSR wherever you are, and these are challenges that I think are applicable here as well as in other parts of the world. there's this very basic challenge that there's a root conflict with this traditional view of business being the business of business is business.